right is still right, even if you stand by yourself.
Mr. Chief Justice, may it please the court.
This is Hans von Spakovsky, and this is the latest edition of Case in Point. And our title today is The Philadelphia Story, Votes and Violence in the Keystone State. Now, threats, intimidation, and corruption, unfortunately, have had a long presence in American elections. Tammany Hall in New York was infamous for its corrupt elections and graft and bribery that infested city government. Chicago had the notorious vote-stealing machine of Richard Daley, who was the mayor for 21 years from 1955 to 1976. Even 6 years after his death in 1982, the U.S. Department of Justice, where I once served, prosecuted the largest voter fraud case in its history, convicted over 60 individuals, and the U.S. attorney at the time estimated that at least 100,000 fraudulent ballots had been cast in that election. Philadelphia also, unfortunately, along with other parts of Pennsylvania, has its own sordid history of election fraud and intimidation and threats. And anyone who thinks that has disappeared, all you need to do is go to the Heritage Fraud Election Fraud database, and you'll see that that is not true. Now, here to talk about a current case going on over this is my friend J. Christian Adams. He is the President and General Counsel of the Public Interest Legal Foundation. He's also a commissioner on the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. Christian and I actually served together in 2017 on President Trump's Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity. He was a career lawyer at the Department of Justice in the voting section, which is where I first met you a very long time ago. And he's a prolific author and written a great book called Injustice. This came out a number of years ago, but if you want to know about the bias and, frankly, incompetence of lawyers inside the Civil Rights Division, it is a book to get. By the way, Christian, you have a very long resume. There's all kinds of other things I could say about you, but I really like the fact that you're a former Eagle Scout, back when the Boy Scouts were actually the Boy Scouts and not the woke Scouts.
Yes.
Tell us about this lawsuit that you all have filed in Pennsylvania, which involved threats of violence against Trump supporters.
Last October, scores of letters were sent to people's homes threatening to kill their cat, show up in the middle of the night, their family, cold, dead winter's night. The letter's pretty chilling. Came in the U.S. mail, Hans. I mean, literally letters addressed to neighbor in big block caps.
Right.
And these went out all over Philadelphia. But it only went to people who had Trump signs in their yard.
You know, you're telling me about this, and I don't remember reading anything in the newspapers. I mean, if this had happened the opposite way, I'm sure it would have been front page screaming headlines. Certainly, the New York Times. I don't remember hearing anything about this.
Yeah, and it should have been front page screaming headlines because in America, you don't have death threats related to your political preferences. That's
right.
What happens in other countries and other eras in the world history. But in America, you shouldn't be threatened for who you support. But that's exactly what happened, and it's no surprise, like you said, that we didn't hear much about it because it still haven't, right? The New York Times hasn't done any stories about this. The Philadelphia Inquirer has done one or two, one about our lawsuit, but almost in a condescending way. And so this is a real problem. Threats of political violence have no place in America.
So in order to send these letters out, obviously, you had people cruising through neighborhoods. And this wasn't just random. Obviously, it must have been organized because it was the same letter, right? It was the same letter that was going to people. I noticed you showed me a copy of it, and it's the same letter that went to all these folks, right?
Yeah, and it says you're now in the database. You are now in the database. We are watching you. It's the same letter. It has a threat to come in the dead of a cold winter's night to visit you in the middle of the night. Yeah,
let me, if I may, if it's okay, let me just read this language. It says, it's a very long letter, folks. Here's a copy of it. It says, but more importantly, we know where you live. You are in this database. In the dead of a cold winter's night this year or next and beyond, there's no knowing what may happen. Your property, your family may be impacted, your cat may get shot and more.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like I said, I haven't seen. I've heard about things like this happening, but I've never seen this in a recent election.
Yeah, and look, you talk about cruising the neighborhood to figure out who has the Trump
Right.
signs. Well, that means evidence is being created, right? People
Yeah.
have ring door cameras now.
Right.
And if you see the same blue El Camino driving around with a clipboard in the middle of the night, you can start to compile evidence, right? If
Right.
it's going by all the same houses. Unfortunately, the media hasn't taken this seriously. That's a problem. Law enforcement hasn't taken this seriously.
Yeah, let's talk about that because, I mean, you served in the Justice Department, so did I. This kind of action is a violation of the Voting Rights Act, Section 11B, to threaten and intimidate voters. I know it's also a violation of state election laws. So in this particular case, you would think there would be both jurisdiction by the FBI and the Justice Department, local police, but also the U.S. Postal Service, right? Because they have a whole postal inspection service that investigates and they go after everything from fraud to threat. So who was this referred to, and what did they or did they not do about it?
Well, that's interesting. So in order to tell that story, it's important to note that we filed a lawsuit against John Doe because we don't know.
Because you don't know who did it, right?
But we asked the United States District Court, the federal court in Philadelphia, to allow us to do discovery against the law enforcement agencies that should be investigating this, including the postal inspectors, the Pennsylvania State Police, the local police who were also involved in taking the complaints. The postal inspectors have vast resources to figure out all sorts of things. Who's licking envelopes, fingerprints, what boxes were these dropped in? They can figure that out.
Right.
Where did the letters get dropped? Maybe there's camera footage that you can trace back to take a look at that. So we did discovery requests to these entities, and the Pennsylvania State Police told us we never had an investigation.
Oh my gosh! One of the most important presidential elections in a long time, a very spirited fight between two candidates, and the state police did nothing about this?
Yeah, so we asked for the files, right? Because if an investigation is closed, there's no FOIA exception. We're allowed to get leads, right? We're doing the work that the Pennsylvania State Police should be doing.
Right, yeah. We should emphasize this point that you can't get copies of records from a law enforcement agency when an investigation is ongoing. But once it's over, then you can, especially under state records laws. And Pennsylvania has, I think, pretty extensive state records laws that allow citizens to get records of what state government is doing, right?
Right, and there's a third outcome here. Not only was there no investigation closed, they never opened one. That's the amazing part is,
oh my God.
Is they said they never had an investigation into these death threats against Pennsylvania voters.
Okay, so the state police is out. Do we know whether the FBI ever got involved in this, or the Biden Justice Department, or were they just not interested?
Yeah, I don't know if Inspector Clouseau was working there. Can't wait for your movie reference later. But we do know the postal inspectors responded to our subpoenas, because remember, these are not just FOIAs. These are straight-up subpoenas issued by the court. Right. The postal inspector said you can't have anything we have. You have to go through TUI regulations. Now, we don't know yet if they have anything. They may just be jerking our chain. We'll find out.
And I should point out, the whole point of filing the suit against John Doe defendants, because when you don't know what they were, the whole point of that was so that you could get a federal court to then authorize you to subpoena the law enforcement records, since they obviously don't seem to be doing anything about it.
Right. And we made a motion to the court, motion for issuance of third-party discovery against related to John Doe investigation. And the court granted that motion, which is good. I mean, that's good that they did. They didn't have to, but they did. Right. We also served subpoenas on some local police departments, the frontline folks who, and guess what? Utterly no investigation. So everybody's dropping the ball here when people are getting threatened to be shot.
Now, where exactly, kind of generally, where were these voters located? Was this in the suburbs of Philadelphia? Was it in more distant places? Was it inside the city, or was it all over?
Here's the scary thing. When we first heard about this, we thought it was the inner suburbs of Philadelphia only, Narberth, Penn, the areas on the main line, just inside the zone of the inner suburbs. Right. We have come to find out, and this is what's chilling, the same thing was happening in Pittsburgh. And it was happening in Mount Lebanon and the inner suburbs in Pittsburgh.
And was it the same letter?
Same exact letter.
Oh, my gosh. Wow. So this wasn't just an isolated example of maybe one person. This was all over the state.
It's a campaign to threaten Trump supporters with death. How about that for a lead story, Philadelphia Inquirer, New York Times, or Washington Post? This was a national, significantly important issue for the nation.
Right.
And you had a coordinated campaign apparently across an entire swing state to threaten people who had Trump signs in their yard with coming in the middle of the night and shooting somebody.
So now the Postal Service said, well, we're not going to turn anything over. We're not going to even tell you whether they did an investigation unless you go through, what do you call it, the TUI regulation. Look, I've been a lawyer for a long time. I don't even, what in the world are the TUI regulations?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to do this. We're going to run this to ground. Look, the TUI, there's a case called TUI that says basically if you, rather than just issuing subpoenas against federal agencies, you have to go through a bureaucratic process of asking for the same info. Well, great, we'll do that. But I have a feeling we're going to be encountering the same sort of resistance we're encountering right now. I mean, look, the Postal Inspection Service has all kinds of resources. They can run DNA on these letters. They can, like I said, go get Ring camera data. They can do fingerprint analysis. They can do box drop analysis. My guess is, it's just a guess, none of this has been done.
Yeah, that's probably true. And for folks who say DNA analysis, actually, I recall just right a couple of years ago, I think it was an absentee ballot fraud case where the prosecutors actually used DNA to figure out who had submitted the fraudulent absentee ballots, right?
That's where we got the idea, because they've already been doing this, right? You can figure out who's licking envelopes from the DNA.
Right.
Why aren't they doing anything? I mean, there should have been an arrest here.
Yeah.
There should have been an arrest by now. It shouldn't be up to a C3 like the Public Interest Legal Foundation to be doing the postal inspector's job.
Yeah, well, since you mentioned that, tell folks, and by the way, I should acknowledge that I actually am on the board of the Public Interest Legal Foundation, besides my regular work at the Heritage Foundation. Tell folks a little bit about what the Public Interest Legal Foundation does.
Yeah, well, we're a C3 election law, litigation, election integrity firm. It's all we do is election law. We're a nonprofit charity, and we do everything from the Voting Rights Act to redistricting to motor voter to voter roll cleanup, all sorts of litigation around the country. And, some of the people on the left like to say we don't do much to protect voting rights. Well, how about this, guys? This is like as good as it gets.
Yeah,
people being threatened to be killed.
Right. And I think Pennsylvania has been fertile ground, right? I think you guys have had another lawsuit going on there for, good gosh, how many years trying to find out? A number of years ago, right? You have to give all the dates for this, right? Pennsylvania admitted that because of what they called a glitch, they had been registering people who were not U.S. citizens whenever they went in to get a driver's license, just automatically doing it. And I mean, this has been going on for years. And so I think you guys have been trying to find out, okay, you admit you did this. Well, how many aliens got registered? And Pennsylvania has fought like heck to not reveal that, right?
Yeah, they admitted they registered to vote between 10,000 and 100,000 non-citizens for 20 years, 2 decades. And we won summary judgment in the federal court down below that we were entitled to the record showing how many, what did you do about it, who is this mysterious expert that Pennsylvania hired to fix it? We don't even know the name of the expert.
Right.
All of the things that went into fixing the problem, Pennsylvania's hiding because the problem is big and they might not have fixed it as well as they could have. And so they're hiding the records. We won below in the court below. Pennsylvania appealed it to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, and actually just recently, unfortunately, the Third Circuit reversed on standing. They said we didn't have standing to bring this case, meaning the right to bring it under federal law.
It's kind of interesting because, as you know, Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, there's been lots of talk about how he may be the candidate one particular party, Democratic Party, looking for to run for president. Well, if he does that, he might be in quite an awkward position of trying to explain why it is that the state didn't want to actually reveal how many non-citizens did they get registered, and how many of them, the other crucial, how many of them actually voted in elections in this state?
I think you're exactly right, Hans, that this is a really uncomfortable position for him about the non-citizens. What's also uncomfortable is the fact that he's in charge of the Pennsylvania State Police. And here are death threats to Pennsylvania voters. Right. And Governor Shapiro has crowed a whole lot about political violence, rightfully so.
Right.
His house got torched.
Right.
But what about this political violence? Is it political violence that just affects Democrats that he's worried about? Or is it political violence that affects Americans that he's worried about? And I'm afraid that unless Governor Shapiro does something about getting the state police to take a second look at this, or first look, that it's really sending a message that only some political violence matters and not all.
Well, we already saw that message delivered certainly by the Obama Justice Department, didn't we? We should mention that this is not the first experience, Kristen, you've had with voter intimidation and intimidation of poll watchers in Pennsylvania. Tell folks what you all saw and what you did back in 2008 when Barack Obama first got elected, and as I recall, there were members of the new Black Panther Party standing outside of polling places, threatening poll watchers, voters, yelling racial epithets. Tell folks a little bit about that case.
Yeah, that was 2008. I was the Justice Department in the voting section, and I had just tried an 11B case in Mississippi, meaning voter intimidation.
Right.
So we saw this happen, and we filed an 11B case against the uniformed Black Panthers. It's in my book you mentioned, Injustice, a lot about it.
By the way, they were, uniform. They were wearing these, black paramilitary outfits.
Berets.
Berets and everything,
Batons,
standing outside polling places. I mean, I'm not sure I would have wanted to walk into a polling place when those guys were there, and nothing was being done about it by the local police.
Of course not. It's Pennsylvania, apparently. Right. The state police don't, or at least didn't seem to care. So we filed the case, 11B, Voting Rights Act. The Panthers didn't respond. They were in default, right? Well, then the inauguration happened, and the incoming Holder Justice Department decided that we would dismiss most of the case, which we did, even though they were in default. So this is...
So for folks who are not lawyers, you need to understand this. The Justice Department won the case because the defendant, in this case the new Black Panther, they didn't show up. They didn't even bother to file an answer. And rather than taking that win, the Holder Obama Justice Department decided, we don't want to do that. We don't want a judgment against the new Black Panther Party for threatening voters and poll watchers in precincts.
It shows how important it is, Hans. When this behavior occurs, you got to do something about it.
Yeah.
Because now, what's happening again? Here we are. This is worse than what happened with the Black Panthers.
It is. Yeah.
I mean, these are letters going to people's homes. We have real clients in this case. You get a letter like that, you're scared for your life.
Right.
Right? This is real stuff. And why it is that Josh Shapiro, the Pennsylvania State Police, the postal inspectors, the local police don't see the human side of this and use their power to do something for good is really a mystery. That's why we're actually offering a reward, $2,000, Public Interest Legal Foundation, if you have any information about who this might be. And by the way, we've gotten some interesting tips because that's how we learned this is also happening in Pittsburgh. And so $2,000 reward, you can get it at publicinterestlegal.org. It's posted.
That's great. These kind of cases involving intimidation, the Justice Department has never filed very many of these, and it's a whole history, right? And I think of the cases it's filed, haven't you? But you were involved in like half of them, right?
Oh, all of them, actually.
All of them.
Yeah. United States versus Ike Brown, which is in Mississippi.
Right.
He published the names of about 100 people. He said, if you try to vote, you'll be arrested.
Right.
And then, of course, the new Black Panther case.
Right. And we should mention that in that Mississippi case that there were lawyers inside the Justice Department, inside the Civil Rights Division, who refused to work on that case. Why? Well, because in this case, it was not what one would usually expect. It was actually a local black official, head of the Democratic Party, who was threatening white voters if they showed up and voted in the Democratic primary. Right?
With arrest.
With arrest.
Right, not just
right.
threatening. It was like, you will be arrested.
I mean, it was like something out of the 1940s or 50s that the races were reversed. And apparently the lawyers inside the Justice Department said, well, the Voting Rights Act doesn't protect everybody. So if a local black official wants to threaten white voters, oh, that's okay.
Yeah, and Hunt, you can't separate that Mississippi case you just mentioned with the new Black Panther case because the hostility was so pent up toward enforcing the law equally that when the Obama Justice Department took over, it was payback time. It was time to kill off the new Black Panther case because they couldn't do that to the Ike Brown case.
Right. And I think we have to mention there's been a huge number of lawyers who have left the Civil Rights Division under the Trump administration. And I noticed, I saw some of the names of people, and some of the names of the people who left were some of the people who refused to work on that Mississippi case, who were involved in dismissing the Philadelphia case, and who basically always took the attitude that the Voting Rights Act is not race neutral. It does not protect everybody, which is just shocking that you would have government lawyers making a claim like that.
Yeah. Well, look, we could get into particular names, which I won't unless you want me to. But one of the lawyers who you're referring to that is no longer there was on election coverage in Noxubee County that you probably authorized in like 05-ish.
Right.
And he was commenting to another lawyer on the team. He said, quote, "Can you believe we're down here protecting white voters?" Unquote. I mean, I think that's in my book. I saw the names there if you really want it. Yeah, that was the attitude. Is the law is a special province of only some Americans, but not all Americans.
Right. And that is not the way it should be, and that's not the way it is under the law. How quickly do you expect things to move along in your current case, where you're trying to find out who sent death threats to Trump supporters all across the state? And again, to emphasize for folks, they were getting death threats. Why? Because they had put a Trump sign in their yard. You know, I mean, that's what led to this.
Yeah, that's the common denominator with everybody who got the death threat letter is they had a Trump sign in the yard or a Trump flag flying. So they had some visible display of support for Trump, and that led to the death threat letter coming in the mail in an actual envelope with handwriting on the front page. On the envelope said neighbor was who it was addressed to at their address. So what's next? I think we're going to have to file a motion to enforce the subpoena against the Postal Inspection Service. That's next, and get into a fight with them. And, you know, let's hope that they see the error of their ways, and let's hope they have an investigation going. Because if nobody did anything, this is a national scandal. I mean, what does it take for the law enforcement agencies designed to protect Americans' right to vote to do something when you get a death threat? I mean, what does it take?
Well, I guess it takes a private organization like yours who's actually willing to try to enforce the law when state and local government isn't willing to do that. Tell me about just kind of generally about Pennsylvania. I mean, you guys have had a lot of litigation there. How does, in terms of how secure or frankly how dirty elections are, I mean, how does Pennsylvania compare to other states where you guys are involved? Yeah,
it's problematic for a couple of big reasons. Number one, you have a Supreme Court in Pennsylvania, many of whom are up for election this year, right? So pay attention. A Supreme Court in Pennsylvania that doesn't follow the letter of the law in Pennsylvania. The law might say one thing, but they say, we'll do the opposite, okay? Voter ID was an example about 10 years ago, other issues recently. The other thing you have is Pennsylvania law gives Philadelphia a lot of home rule to basically run their city into the ground, right? They have authority in Philadelphia to be lawless, and that's a problem. Here's what I think the biggest problem in Pennsylvania is. You can't monitor the election because monitoring is very important. We just did a whole report about monitoring in Michigan.
Right.
It has a lot of interesting observations, another topic.
And by monitor, we're talking about having poll observers in, which is,
Yeah.
I mean, it's so important in the United States that what does our State Department do? We send
Right.
teams of poll watchers all over the world. But
Right.
that's a problem in Pennsylvania, isn't it?
Because they have a state law that does not allow any monitors into the Philadelphia polls unless you're a Philadelphia voter. So when you get a city like Philadelphia that's overwhelmingly blue and hardcore blue and all the history of Philadelphia, you can't find teams of people. Now, some people have done a very good job. Linda Kern's a lawyer. They're getting people in. But it's a Herculean task. Ideally, you send people from Lehigh County, Northampton County, Bucks County into Philadelphia
Right.
to watch. And so all you're doing is watching.
Right.
You're not challenging. You're just watching. Philadelphia elections are conducted behind a cloak where we can't see what's happening.
And that's intentional.
100% intentional.
Right. And we should mention, folks, I talked about our election fraud database at the beginning. One of the cases we added, I think only two years ago, was a former Democratic congressman, who had become a political consultant. And he pleaded guilty to, I think, about a dozen felonies. And what was he doing? He was bribing the managers of polling places inside Philadelphia to stuff fraudulent ballots into the ballot box.
Yeah, it's actually, they still had the machines back then
Yeah.
when this happened. And they were paying those managers to spin the odometers.
Right.
Like put votes in when the polls closed.
Right. And he did this in multiple elections. I think two of the poll managers also pleaded guilty. One of whom was an aide to, I think, a member of the city council. Yeah. He did this in multiple elections. So we don't really know how many hundreds or perhaps thousands of fraudulent ballots were cast. And his clients were both local, state, and federal candidates.
Yeah, and all of this happened recently. This is not like from 1920s.
Right. This is just a couple of years ago.
It all happened after you and I endured insults and name-calling by some academics in the country who claim this stuff doesn't go on. Right? That this is, and then, of course, they don't ever talk about when it does go on, right? You don't ever hear them mention the Philadelphia guilty pleas.
Right.
Or don't forget, there was state representatives from Philadelphia before that, about 9 years ago, who pled guilty for accepting jewelry and Tiffany glassware for voting against voter ID.
Right.
I mean, these are real stories.
Yeah, real bribes. Well, Christian, I thank you for being here today. I hope you success with this case because it is important that we find out who did this. And, I hope folks in Pennsylvania who may hear about this perhaps complain. Complain to their elected representatives about the fact that law enforcement hasn't really done anything about this. Now, Christian, one of the things I do on this show is I always try to do a classic movie review at the end. You know how much I like classic movies. And this time I found some – look, we're talking about a very serious subject, threats of dire violence against voters. But I could not resist we're just a little bit away from the 85th anniversary of the first appearance of that wisecracking, all-American practical joker Bugs Bunny in 1940 in Wild Hare. But in 1951, the animators at Looney Tunes put together a great cartoon about elections. It's called Ballot Box Bunny, and it's Yosemite Sam is running for mayor. And Bugs Bunny decides to run against him after he hears that part of Yosemite Sam's platform is to, quote, rid this country of every last rabbit if elected. So the two candidates play every dirty campaign trick you can imagine on each other. But the reason this cartoon is so good is that those dirty tricks aren't much different from what we actually see in elections in this country. Yosemite Sam also makes a campaign promise, which once you hear it, it resembles so many others we've heard in our lifetimes. His promise is there's enough fresh air and sunshine in this great country of ours for everybody, and I'll see to it that you get your fair share. With a current federal budget deficit of over $7 trillion and a crippling debt over $36 trillion, politicians are still making sure that everybody gets more than their fair share. So this has been Hans von Spakovsky for Case in Point, and court is adjourned.
Well, I stand on this platform. I stand for union suits, and union stations for the little people. There's enough fresh air and sunshine in this great country of ours for everybody, and I'll see to it that you'll get your share.